You're listening to Where You Live with Gene Sullivan.
Welcome back to Where You Live. I'm Gene Sullivan, broadcasting from the True North Painting Studios. The show is also brought to you by American Family Insurance, the Kim Bennett Agency, and Extreme Exteriors. Before we get back into our story about what's happening in the state of Illinois with major legislation that's going to impact HOAs there, let me just let all our listeners know we've got a free gift for you. We put together a bi-monthly newsletter called What's New. A lot of what we talk about on the show, we write in further detail in that newsletter. People that are on the show are also contributors to that newsletter. It's yours free. All you have to do is give us a call during the week at 952-922-2500. Ask for Lori, and she'll make sure that you start receiving your subscription either electronically or by mail. Getting back to the state of Illinois and some recent changes with HOA legislation that's taking place this year in 2014. One we dealt with already was solar and wind power. Item number 2 is dealing with the idea of conflicts of interest and contracts with family and friends. And here is, well, first of all, let's define what is a conflict of interest. What does it mean? When does it exist? Well, simply put, when you have a conflict of interest, all you really mean is that you have a person who has an allegiance to a number of different entities. All of us do. You have an allegiance to your family. You have an allegiance where you work. You probably have an allegiance, some to the Girl Scouts of America, others to the Knights of Columbus, others to your local PTA, others to neighborhood groups. There's a number of allegiances that we have. A conflict of interest takes place only when the people of power, the decision makers, or anybody in that group who has the ability to influence the decision makers has an allegiance to two competing entities, that they should do the honorable thing by disclosing their relationship. If you disclose the relationship, you give the opportunity of the people to say, okay, thank you. With that in mind, we're going to still decide. And sometimes groups, after something has been disclosed like that, will move ahead and actually accept a contract or an agreement with someone else, knowing that there is a competing allegiances that a person or people might have. There are other times that people will hear that and will say, no, that isn't. Well, what did the state legislature do here? This is very interesting. It says that concerning contracts with friends and family, the Illinois Common Interest Community Association Act will prohibit associations from entering into contracts with board members, their immediate family members, or companies in which they own a 25% or more interest unless prior notice is given to the owners. Did you catch that? So apparently, if you only own 24% interest in a company and are only going to receive 24% of the profit instead of 25% or more, I guess you don't have to disclose it. That's what it says here, according to the Illinois State Legislature. If you own a company or your immediate family and it's 25% or more, you need to disclose before entering into a contract. Otherwise, apparently, you don't need to do that. Another aspect of this particular bill here that I find interesting, it has the definition of immediate family members. Okay, and so let's take a look at that. If the company is an immediate family member, and by that they mean you must disclose if you own it, If it's owned by your parents, that's an immediate family member, your siblings, so your brothers and sisters, your spouse, your husband or wife, or if owned by your children. But apparently, they see no problem and there is no conflict of interest if it's Uncle Ned. Hey, no problem. Grandpa Smith, don't even give it another thought. How about your best friend? Oh, that's not a problem either. They only define that a conflict occurs with immediate family when it's defined this way. It's interesting. They refer to this as dealing with contracts with friends and family, but they only mention family here. They don't even deal with or even tip the hat at all to discussing what it means to having a conflict of interest with a friend. I think a conflict of interest could take place with a best friend that you want to see become remunerated and compensated with a contract with an association. Ken, you've got to ask yourself, what is really happening here? Ken, is this a good way of doing business? What I find real interesting here is that, if you were, what makes me think about here is what was in the state legislators' mind when they wrote this law? They were very specific, weren't they, about 25% or more ownership, or what constitutes conflict of interest with what immediate family is and what isn't an immediate family member. One of the things that you've got to ask yourself is, why was it set up this way? Why were these percentages? Why were these relationships described very specifically? I would be interested to know, is it because that's what legislators in Illinois have set up for themselves without having to disclose to the Illinois state legislature? Every legislature is very specific. In the state of Minnesota, I'm very happy to say that they have gone way overboard. If you're a legislator in our state, if someone was a lobbyist trying to get the favor of a particular legislator for their bill, a legislator is not even able to allow that lobbyist to take him out to lunch or even to do anything in the least bit at all. That just can't be done. They drew the line very specifically and said, we're not even going to go there. It's interesting that the Illinois legislature said, well, if it's as long as it's under 25%, I guess that can't be considered a conflict of interest. And I'm going to say, really, is that really what you want to do? Can you see how this can be a very bad law? I'd like to, just as a side note, just say, if you're a homeowner association and you want to use, and you're on the board and you want to use a family or a friend, how do you do it? You can do it, but the procedure, the way it ought to be done, and it doesn't matter what percent of ownership, even if there's 1% ownership, I think you need to disclose. And so if I were on the board, sitting on the board of my HOA, and I wanted a family member or friend to be looked at for a contract, let's say for the snow plowing, I would have to, number one, disclose to the others on the board that relationship and say to the board, I have a relationship with this vendor. And now that I've disclosed that, remember, conflict of interest is not only being able to have the authority to make the decision, but it's also having the power and ability to influence the decision making. So once I have now disclosed that, I would need to recuse myself. I would need to step away and say, I would like to have you consider, other board members, this family member for the snow plowing here at our HOA. And then that board member should recuse themselves, pull back, not even be a part of the discussion, mind you, to try and influence, definitely not be a part of the vote. And now that board has the ability to make that decision, and there is no conflict of interest with those other members. They can take a look at that contract based on its merits compared to the other bids that they have. Once that selection has been made, and let's say that board of directors has gone forward and said, we're going to move forward with the contract with so-and-so who's a family member of this board member, the next step is to disclose again. And that is that in the meeting minutes of the board, it needs to be clearly stated so that a decision was made and how the decision was made so that they know that there was no undue influence. And then that ought to go out to everybody in the association. Full disclosure. Do you see how that takes place? To say that you just are going to do it based on a percentage and saying that there's no such thing as a conflict of interest if the percentage of ownership is less than 25%, that's ridiculous. What we're talking about here today are some of the badly written laws, in this case in the state of Illinois, concerning HOAs. But there's so much more, so don't go away. We'll be back with more after these messages.